Hello. Hi. Good evening, everyone. So, we're going to be starting now. Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all to this book launch of Raw Material by Arpit Agarwal, sorry, that's my name. Gupta is my name. I'm Ishita Gupta from Subtext Literary Agency, and along with Paper Towns Publishers, we are delighted to host you today. Can I please request everyone to put their phones on silent? And I think I'll begin the evening by calling Mr. Manik Jaiswal, who is the co-founder at Paper Towns, to say a few words about the book. A round of applause for Manik, please.
Thank you, Ishita, and good evening, everyone. On behalf of Paper Towns Publishers, I extend a heartfelt welcome to all of you. We have great evenings ahead with insightful discussions and, of course, an engaging conversation with Arpit Agarwal and his brilliant debut novel. See, at Paper Towns, we have always been on the lookout for interesting and captivating stories. So last year, when we had a little conversation with Arpit and I got to know about his script, I was definitely intrigued. But at the same time, a little cautious because of the intense and research-based work in the book. Because we do understand writing a compelling spy thriller requires an understanding of global politics, current affairs, and intelligence dynamics, as well as the ability to craft a gripping narrative because you have to blend fiction in a way that it makes sense, keeping intact the research part and also not sounding very academics. It's a tough combination to get it right, and I'm sure, and I believe Arpit has done a wonderful job with this book. But once I had read it, we knew we had something special. The book had all the elements of a world-class thriller, and of course, like I mentioned, deep geopolitical insight, masterful storytelling, and undeniable cinematic quality. As you flip through the pages, you would find yourself immersed in the book, picturing yourself in the setup. As we learned more about Arpit's background, we understood, the way book was written, we understood his experience and interest in news, entertainment, and international media. It all made sense. His knowledge and storytelling instincts shine through every page. We are incredibly proud and very happy to publish Raw Material, and we are excited what lies ahead, and we believe this book to become a next sensation very soon. Thank you so much. Now to officially launch the book, may I invite Arpit to the stage?
Thank you so much for your warm applause. So if you decide to take any pictures and post them on social media, please use the hashtag raw material. I'm audible, right? Yeah, okay. So we have a hopefully fascinating evening ahead. First, we'll dive into a panel discussion on Tibet, because Tibet is a really integral part of the narrative of the book, followed by an in-depth conversation with Arpit about the book itself. So I'd like to invite Professor Siddiq Wahid to please join me on the stage. Yes. So at present, Professor Wahid is a distinguished professor in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at Shiv Nadar University and Institute of Eminence. He's also an adjunct fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies in New Delhi. His research interests lie in the realm of cultural and political history of the Central Eurasians, Central Eurasia's Chingizid Mongolia and Gelugpa Tibet, along with Tsarist Central Asia and Qing China. Professor Wahid earned his BA in political philosophy from Gustavus Adolphus College and his MA and PhD in Inner Asian and Altaic Studies at Harvard University. Thank you, Professor Wahid, for being here. May I now please call Arpita Das, who will moderate the panel, onto the stage. Arpita is an alumna of St. Stephen's College, Delhi University, and of the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, where she was a Felix Scholar. She's the founder and publisher of award-winning independent publishing house Yoda Press, which is based in New Delhi. She also teaches publishing and critical thinking at Ashoka University. In the past, she's been involved with setting up the Word Lab at the Indian Institute of Human Settlements in Bangalore. She's a former board member of Publish Her, which is an organization that is dedicated to women working in publishing throughout the world. She writes frequently on book culture, publishing, popular culture, bibliotherapy, gender, and she's also the editor of the South Asia series at Melbourne University Publishing. So thank you, Arpita, for being here, and all yours.
Hi, everyone. You should always keep the moderator's introduction short. But thank you for that lovely, warm introduction. So really, really lovely to be here today for many reasons. Arpit is an old friend. He's also a namesake. We've known each other since '95, I think. Ishita, who's the literary agent of the book, is a very dear friend of mine as well. The young student, at one time my student, who edited the book first, Arsh Kabra, is also here. So I find that, there are all these different strands of, bizarrely enough, my life intersecting with this book, which is serendipitous and lovely. And I'm really, really honored to do this sort of a inaugural panel for this book with Professor Wahid here. And also very warmed in terms of my own politics and work to know that, and that's what we were discussing sitting there all this time, that Arpit would want to foreground a discussion on Tibet and Tibetan culture and politics, as part of a discussion of his book. Now, some of you must be mystified. I mean, why are we talking about Tibetan politics when it's a spy thriller? It is a fabulous spy thriller. I, of course, read the raw manuscript, no? And I think there has been work on that, and now I'll get to read the finished product. But even the raw manuscript was a page-turner. And one of the things that I was very, very intrigued by at that point itself is that the heart of the story is really in Tibet. And there are two protagonists. I don't want to give you any major details about that, but two main protagonists who are also part Tibetan. And that is part of the narrative for a large chunk of the book. So I think it is only fair that we start this celebration of Arpit's debut novel with a discussion about Tibet. And we have absolutely the best person here to talk about it. We've been talking for the last half an hour about Tibetan culture and politics, and I just want to dive right into the questions that I have already posed to you outside, and perhaps you'll have to be a little more careful about what you say. No, I'm just joking. So, Professor Wahid, one of the things that we were discussing outside is that there was this time when Arpit and I were growing up, for instance, where, there was that phase of Richard Gere talking about the Dalai Lama and the Free Tibet movement. And it's a two-parter question, because the first part is, of course, how is it that that has sort of waned, that kind of almost global cultural sort of hype around a very, very localized political movement? How did that grow the way it did and then it just waned? And secondly, it's a more personal question. What did you think about it as a specialist on the region? And you can answer that in whichever order you want to. Do you want to take the mic? Just press the
button. Is that good? Yeah. Okay, great. Sorry, so a two-part question. One was a localized sort of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah.
A global cultural hype
Yeah.
around a local movement.
Yeah, I think there were several reasons for it. One is that it took place, at least the Chinese takeover of Tibet took place in 1950, which was sort of like 5 years after the Cold War regime started. And so there was this dichotomy between the US and the USSR. People had to belong to both camps, and then Tibet fell into one camp, which is the quote-unquote free world. And the other one was, I guess, the not free world of communist Russia or the Soviet Union. And so I think it immediately assumed a somewhat global dimension, because this was in the early days of the domino theory about what would happen if this terrible communists did what they did, and so forth. So I think that was one. And to my mind, in retrospect, that was a sort of like a very patronizing patronage of Tibet, if you will. And one of the most stark examples of it was FDR Roosevelt, when he named Camp David Shangri-La. And now there are about 3 or 4 books out on the CIA and its involvement with the Tibetans. And if you read them carefully, it's patronizing, it's a sort of a joke, and they do it, but they're obviously doing it for geopolitical reasons, in terms of somehow where America would get a foothold in the world, and somewhat in a sloppy manner on this side of the globe. So I think that was one reason for its hype, if you will, at that time. The other reason, of course, was the Shangri-La image of James Hilton's Lost Horizon or something, somewhere in the 30s or 40s it was published. Yeah. And so it was, these Tibetans who never seem to age and are full of wisdom and stuff like that. And I think that was one phase. So, and I think that the second phase, which, shall we say, for lack of a better term, the Richard Gere phase, where, people were reacting to Tibet, was done, was very gratefully accepted, that's for sure. But, and I don't know if there are any Tibetans, which seems odd if there are no Tibetans in the crowd, in the thing. But at any rate, it doesn't matter. I'm sure they'll read. But, that phase was very gratefully received because it was an emotive sort of reaction. And so there was a lot of sympathy for Tibet, albeit not much empathy, which is slightly different in that it requires people to understand where Tibet is coming from. And Tibet was not and has not been for 400 years, this meek and mild sort of, people and so forth. They are very meek and very mild and very, friendly, very optimistic, all the things that we describe. But it was also an empire. It was an empire for 400 years and did things that empires do, which is raid other countries, such as my homeland, Ladakh, and raided it and went to war with it, went to Bhutan. So much so that Bhutan and Ladakh, although they are separated by 1,500 miles, had an alliance of some sort without really knowing what the alliance was all about, apart from the fact that they were reacting to the Gelugpa, or the Yellow Hat order of Tibetan Buddhism, and that was about it. That was what bound them together, and Sikkim as well, and all along the Himalaya. So I mean, and that needs to be understood in the context of why Tibet is important. It's important because it was a cultural complex with a very deep religion that it took very seriously, with a metaphysical sort of foundation to it, right. And would therefore, it would behoove us to look at it seriously in a slightly different way. Sure. And the thing is that Richard Gere was very sincere, and he was very, he was very, shall we say, dug deep in order to understand Tibet and in order to advocate for Tibet. But there was a larger crowd which ended up doing what I think, if anybody knows anything about China, you don't do, which is insult China, as only Americans can, in a very sort of, open manner, and you don't insult them publicly. And I think that from my point of view, it has hurt the Tibetan cause, not Richard Gere, far be it, I mean, for all of you who be here, and so, but I think that that mold of resistance, shall we say, affected it negatively. Right. And put the Tibet movement, if you will, back several years.
Right. One of the interesting things you said to me outside was that you're happy about where things stand at the moment because there is a sense of now it's realistic. No. Now it's sort of, we're not in the realm of some imaginary, sort of support or solidarity. Mm-hmm. When I posed to you the question that why is it that we are not hearing the Free Tibet discourse as loudly as we used to, you responded by saying that actually it's not a bad thing. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I mean, I don't know that, not hearing about Free Tibet is a good thing. It's not. I think that needs to be ratcheted up. But what I meant outside was that now it's come onto a plane which is sort of sound from a historical point of view, from a political point of view, and from a geopolitical point of view. And that is that there is a value to Tibet, which is very, very, its contribution can and will be very profound if it is given the right platform, and I think that's what I meant by that. And actually this round was kicked off by His Holiness the Dalai Lama himself in 1988, when he said something which was very radical and remains very radical. And that is that he said, all right, and 88, this is well before 91, 92, when the Berlin Wall collapsed and the world order sort of went for a toss, and suddenly there were new possibilities coming up. So this was 3 years, 4 years before that. His Holiness said, okay, fine, you guys are big boys, meaning China, and the US is just, a big power. So therefore, all right, I understand, no political independence. I'll buy it, And instead, what we will have, or what we want, is full, unambiguous, cultural autonomy. And I don't think he even used the word freedom or independence or anything like that. He said autonomy, And I think that puts it all on a different plane, because it says that they have said something here which any democratic country should make available, However, neither Washington, nor Beijing, nor any of the key countries, including Delhi, really took it up very seriously. I don't think. It was like, okay, so fine, we have a little edge, and things. It's come back only after 91, 92. When suddenly the world is now looking at, okay, so maybe there's another world order in the offing. And so therefore, I think it is this. Another thing that it has done, which may not be perceptible to those who don't know the Tibetan community well, not that I necessarily do. I mean, I'm a desk jockey rather than anything else, But the point is what we do know is that it has caused a rift within the Tibetan community, and there are younger ones that are quote unquote radical and say we'll wait. Right. Israel waited for 3,000 years. Yeah. Well, I don't know about that, but that's a different issue altogether, and stuff. And so they do believe and even go so far as to take a stance that if violence is needed, we will do it, And the other stance, of course, is His Holiness's stand, which is softer and a little bit, very understanding of the youthful resistance and so forth. And I have been watching that discourse a little bit, not as much, because I'm a medievalist, as you accuse me of being, and so forth. So
I said it with great respect.
But but watching it, it's an interesting thing to look at and to see where it's going to go, particularly given Tibetan Buddhism, and particularly given His Holiness, and the whole sort of set of circumstances that surrounds it.
Right. So talking about cultural autonomy and the importance and role of culture, what do you think, I mean, this sort of a presence or a discussion around Tibet in a space now where, it is much more realistically viewed, right? In a book like Raw Material, or in cinema, or in music, or in poetry, for that matter. Where do you see the significance of it? Where do you see it going? Does it matter at all? You said that it's important to keep the Free Tibet discourse alive and to perhaps even ratchet it up.
I think from a cultural point of view, it's not just important, I think it's critical, And one of the things that I think you'll notice amongst Tibetans if you move around them, one whole side of my family is Tibetan. I mean, from central Tibet in Lhasa, And if you listen, to the discussions and sort of thing go on, is that you will grasp the fact that it is a living culture, and it's a living culture, which means that it is not permanent. There is no, I saw in some of the questions that were sent to me, the words authentic, so I think so when it comes to culture, I take words like authentic and purity of the culture in a very guarded sort of way, because if it is living, it's changing. Yeah. And if you know anything about Buddhism, it's all about impermanence and the permanence of nothing. So from that point of view, I think the Tibetans are, my father, God rest his soul, used to say, if you really observe, Tibetans are the bravest people on this earth, because despite the trauma of what has happened to the land, they're always smiling. And I've visited Tibet. I mean, the Tibetan diaspora or those in exile, you'd notice them very regularly, I'm sure, if you have had anything to do with the Tibetan culture, But even within Tibet, despite all, and I've visited Tibet 5 or 6 times, visited my ancestral home, right under the Potala, and so forth, over there, and things, they're smiling, and they're happy. They're very serious when they are serious about their independence, about the fact of, them being able to practice the culture properly and so forth. So I think that is something, so anything like the book, which I'm sorry to say I haven't read, at all, but I look forward to it very much. Anything to do with the arts, anything to do with literature, anything to do with beauty and the world at large is something that I think you grab and take a hold of and talk about as much as possible, because it introduces something into our political life which is now more or less dead. And that is a certain morality, you know. And by moral, I don't mean you know, good or bad, or are you going to hell or are you going to have heaven, but just life in its simplicity and what it means. You know, a love of beauty, for example, living and loving, growing and eating. You know, we don't think about that as part of politics anymore. Yeah. We don't think about that as even part of society anymore. You know, which is, you know, so if you observe His Holiness, I see that as what is keeping Tibet alive, is that is the attitude, you know. And recently I've been introduced to Abdullah Öcalan of the Kurdish movement. Yeah. And we have two Kurds over here, by the way, who are sitting here. And they, one of them, Arif, gave me a book about Öcalan's ideas. And he talks about this, which I had been thinking but not been able to articulate very much. So thank you very much, by the way, Arif. I've read it, I gobbled it up, you know, because it was an expansion of this whole idea and so forth, which is very similar to the Dalai Lama's idea, you know, on that. Is that, so I think that Tibet introduces that into our modern, somewhat fractured, I mean, to put it very mildly, politics of the day. You know, and I think that that's what institutions, the sacredness of certain institutions and so forth. I mean, it may be parliament on the one hand, but it may be an ecclesiastic something or the other on the other, you know, which is not to say that the ecclesiastics were always untouchable. You know, there are many histories there too. But you know, I think that those are some of the things that we had that we are seeing melting away in front of us.
Is it also because when we think of the Tibetan artists and writers, particularly, is it also because there is a sort of a, I won't say conflict, but there is some kind of dissonance between what, you know, the perception of the Tibetan way of life as being very sort of steeped in mysticism, something very traditional, and then they're also negotiating life in the modern world. Is it also because of that dissonance?
Well, I would say the opposite about Tibetans, at least. You know, and that is, there is no dissonance. You know, they don't have this notion, I believe, you know, of you know, some sort of a purity about their way of life. They will incorporate everything. I went to school, I mean, the first 8 or 9 years of schooling, I went to school in Darjeeling in a boarding school, you know. And the first one, I mean, we had a lot of Tibetans there. And the first ones to grab the Beatles and to grab everything was these guys. You know, they had the Beatle haircut. Almost got kicked out of school for it and stuff like that, you know. So, but it was phenomenal to watch. I mean, in retrospect, in those days, I just admired the guitars, you know, and stuff. But in retrospect, it was wonderful to watch this and then feel themselves comfortable in their own skin, you know, and in their own sort of whole environment, you know. And these were the children of early exiles already into India and so forth. So.
But the history of exile and what it has meant to live away from those who live away in other countries, those who live in India, how is that now infusing or, you know, sort of creating a different body of work in terms of there I must beg ignorance, because I'm embarrassed to say I really haven't followed that literature. I haven't followed fiction. I haven't followed poetry that is coming out of Tibet and amongst Tibetans, not out of Tibet, not so much. On the other hand, you know, on the flip side of the coin, there is a Tibetan
was a dear friend of my father's, now passed away, who was who sided, shall we say, with the Chinese, with the argument that we have to talk to these guys. I mean, they just overrun our country, and so let's talk to them. And got a lot of flack from it, for it, from a lot of people, you know, in Tibet as well as outside of Tibet, the Tibetan diaspora and so forth, but wrote a phenomenal commentary in Tibetan on Marxism, you know, which was the first one, and was a person who spent the longest time in isolation in prison during the Cultural Revolution. His name was Phuntsok Wangyal, often called Wang, and he lived through it to come out of it after China also embraced capitalism with Chinese characteristics, you know, came back into it, and was able to then input into the new China as well. You know, so I think that those are some examples of how they're really, I mean, I tend to call them after the Irish poet, forget his name, but unpartitioned intellects. You know, is that they can assimilate, and they can express themselves anew with a synthesis, you know, which is different from syncretism, in the sense that syncretism is khichdi, you know, because you can tell the dal from the rice and so forth in that. Whereas in synthesis, it's the dissolved salt or, you know, sugar in the water. You know, it just becomes a new product altogether. And I think that we all need to do that, especially in our world now, you know, and things. But I think that the Tibetans do it in a very ordinary, very, you know, sort of unconscious manner, which makes it all the more beautiful.
Right. I think that's a lovely point for us to end this on, because that reminds me of something in the book. So thank you so very much for that lovely, lovely conversation, for all your generosity. Thank you. Thanks.
Your glasses. That's right.
Thank you, Professor Wahid, for that most insightful discussion. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought, and I hope it will stay with us for some time. And thank you, Arpita, for engaging him so wonderfully. Now on to talking about the book itself. May I please invite Mr. Arun Thapar onto the stage. He's a veteran media professional and executive producer who has been producing and creating content for over 3 decades. And Arpit, of course. And I'd like to call Arpit to join us on the stage as well.
Right. Hello. Sorry, at age 52, I feel like a medievalist as well. Thanks very much for being here, everybody. And it's lovely to see an absolutely full house. And we're here to celebrate this man who most of us in this room know for at least 30 years, and his new avatar, that of a freshly minted author. Congratulations, Arpit. Well done. Very proud of you. So seeing this is quite interesting, you know, this massive backdrop. I was just carrying this with me. So I've had it for a while. So that's one of the many iterations that the book has gone through. And it's quite interesting that Arpit moved to Delhi from Mumbai a few years ago, and I was a bit miffed with him because he went quite AWOL for about a year and a half. And then one fine day I get a phone call saying, Arun, listen, I have a favor to ask. And I said, sure. Where have you been all this while? And he said, well, I've just dropped you an email. I've written a book. So this is one of the advanced editions, the manuscript, and I'd like you to have a read at it. And I was completely blown away. I said, wow, you've been doing this for a year and a half? No wonder you were so quiet and unavailable. And I opened my email and I saw there wasn't just a book, it was a pretty sensational, spy thriller that traverses geographies and history and geopolitics and, over this large sort of period of history over 70 years. And in a place like Tibet, which frankly speaking, many of us, tend to forget about. And so hats off, Arpit. And before we dive into this, let me ask you in the eternal words of Indian television journalism, आपको कैसा लग रहा है?
I think,
You can breathe, that's all right.
yeah, just very happy, yes, very nervous as well. And I think the overriding emotion is just relieved that it's done. And today is the first and last time that I'm meeting so many people and I'm going to be on a stage. I think that's that's is it. Sorry? I'm out of my depth here. I'm very happy behind the scene. This really scares me.
Okay, right. So, Arpit, a lot of us, some of us have read the book, but a lot of us have not, including Professor Wahid. Why don't you tell us what the book is about? A brief summary without giving away too much.
Okay. So, Raw Material at its core is a fast-paced thriller, but it's not your usual, gangs and guns and car chases. It's a bit different, but it does have an element of that. Quite a bit of it, actually. So Raw Material, as you must have gathered by now, it's built on real-life history, real-life events such as the Tibetan uprising, the flight of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to India, and the COVID-19 pandemic. And it takes these events and it merges them into one cohesive story. The story tracks 3 different plot lines. The first is of Wei. That's Wei, actually. He's the villain of the piece. He's dark, he's sinister, he's just bad. The second is of Pema. Pema is this young Tibetan guerrilla fighter. She's not on the poster. And she's also Wei's mother. Her story merges with the third plot line, which is of Vijay. Vijay is also Pema's son, but from another union. Vijay is a young, well, not young, is an unassuming Indian police officer. And he finds himself ensnared in this plot hatched by Wei from across the Himalayas. And the story is about how he discovers the plot, how he manages to get out of it. And I tell this story exploring different themes, such as in the case of Wei, we explore unmatched ambition, greed, usual universal theme of chasing money and power.
Right.
In the case of Pema, we explore forced adulthood, betrayal, a bit of love, abandonment. And we also, in the story, explore the role of media. A lot of my media friends are here, and the entire contingent there. So we explore a bit of the changing landscape of media worldwide and how it's increasingly open to manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, the story explores a what-if scenario of how the pandemic began. And from what I'm reading about what the investigative agencies are discovering across the world, my story may not be that far from the truth. So that, in a nutshell, is what the story is about.
Fantastic. Why Tibet? It's a pretty remote part of the world. It's also behind an iron curtain of its own. There's not much that emerges from Lhasa and Tibet because information is controlled. It's a tough subject to go into, and let alone to write a very expansive book about. So why Tibet, considering you've grown up in South India and in North India, and whether you're Gupta or an Agarwal, of course, we can settle later. But your influences have largely been Hindi heartland. Why all the way to Tibet?
So interestingly, though I did grow up in Pondicherry in an ashram, I always had Tibetan classmates. So what I found later is that the ashram where I grew up, it had an opening for the Tibetan cause. And the mother of the ashram, she had told the Tibetan delegation at that time in the 1950s that our institution is always open to you. So they had a refugee camp in Pondicherry, and at any given point of time, the ashram has always had a couple of students from that camp into the ashram. So I always had this, bunch of Tibetan friends. So in a sense, I grew up with Tibet, and it just always fascinated me. Later on, when I started reading, my first, I think, introduction to Tibet was through Tintin in Tibet.
Right.
I've always been a huge Tintin fan, as you probably know. And Tibet has just been this place of, it's remote, it's inaccessible, there's a sense of adventure around it. And of course, the lure of, these meditative people up there practicing Buddhism, it just fascinated me. So when I decided to write, it was, I think, just natural that it came. It had to be in my book.
Are you likely to get a visa after this book?
That's a good one. I hope so. I don't know.
Okay, so there's a lot of history, a lot of geopolitics. It traverses a wide expanse of time, almost 70 years, if I recollect. I think 2018 is where it ends largely, and goes back all the way to partition and stuff like that. What part of it is historical, and how do you, as a writer, sort of intertwine the history with the fiction and then make it credible?
So the first chapter is set in 2018, but actually that's a time jump.
Right.
Because from the second chapter onwards, it's then linear. So the second chapter, I think, is 1946, and then it, just progresses non-stop. And at some point in the book, you will realize that, I've read the first chapter, which is actually supposed to come here. So I've just, in a sense, written the entire book.
So fractured timeline.
Yeah, I've just picked up one chapter and I put it in the beginning because it had a lot of action in it.
Right.
The previous part, before the present times of 2018, 19, 20, is just the backstory. It's setting up the characters, who they were, what is it that has made them into what they are. And through that process, I get to speak about the history of Tibet, what they went through, what is the Tibetan uprising all about?
Right.
Why did the Dalai Lama have to leave the Potala and come to India?
Right. So I can clearly see the elements of a visual storyteller here. All your experiences, as a content creator, running media companies, television media companies, Balaji, and then, Miditech, and of course Keshet. That was a strong influence, I think. Keshet is the Israeli company that owns rights to Homeland, for example. Are you thinking of turning this into a series, into a movie, or let me be blunt, did you write it as one?
Well, because, you and I, we were born into television. We've only done television. So television is in the book. There's no two ways about it. Anyone who's read the book so far, they've all come back to me with the same feedback, that it's cinematic, it's very visual, it's very descriptive. I don't know how to write any other way. It's my first book. Will it become a series or something? I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah, well, it certainly reads like a screenplay. So, so that's very much there. Checks on the mail, I hope. So, yeah. So, yeah, characters. Firstly, you're an Amitabh Bachchan fan, clearly, which is why Vijay, So there's clearly a Vijay. I don't know whether he's Gupta or Saxena or Srivastava, but he's definitely Vijay. Is that the reason why Vijay? Because in the year 2018, to think of a name like Vijay is a bit retro. Was that deliberate?
It was deliberate in the sense that, it's a well-established name. Vijay stands, exactly for the reason you gave. Amitabh Bachchan through the 70s, every character was Vijay. And I just love what that name stands for. The characters keep changing through all those movies, but what Vijay symbolizes remains the same. And our Vijay in the story is exactly that. He's honest, he is a simple man, a middle class, hard-working person who's come up the ranks. That's who Vijay is.
Is he possibly the next Jack Ryan? Is he the Indian Jack Ryan? Clearly, I mean, there's a lot of Tom Clancy here. I can see influences there.
Well, why not? Fingers crossed.
Right. So speaking of influences, who are your...
Put me in touch with people. You're in the industry.
So, I mean, speaking of influences, who are your literary influences or movies or series? You know, where did it all come from? You suddenly made a transition from being a TV man, a media guy, you know, in the business of crafting images and stories, and suddenly you write this pretty intense book. How did you do that and why?
Well, in terms of influences, I've always been fascinated by spy thrillers. I think the first one I read was, I think, The Day of the Jackal.
Forsyth.
Followed by Odessa File. That's Frederick Forsyth.
Frederick
right?
Forsyth, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then, you know, I read Ludlum, the Bond series. These have been early influences. But I think it would be fair to say that what has really influenced me is OTT, the series. And especially when I started working in distributing some of these Israeli series in India and South Asia.
Yeah.
At that time, my job required me to not just watch, take notes about, you know, these spy thrillers like
For format
Homeland,
adaptations, yeah.
format adaptation, how it can be reimagined for a particular area, but also get into the mind of the writer. What is the history behind it? Why did the writer write this? Is it based on something that actually happened? So on and so forth. Where else has this traveled? How was it received there? So I think for the last almost 10 years, spy thrillers have been really, you know, bouncing around in my head. So it had to come out somewhere.
So I think that's a good segue. Would you like to read us a passage? I've requested Arpit to read us a couple of passages through the course of this chat, and you know, why don't you begin with the first one you've shortlisted?
So I've spoken about Wei. Let me read a bit about who Wei is. Wei is our villain. So this is a short little thing that I've written on who Wei really is. This is in the chapter called Malafide. Wei Danming was a force to be reckoned with. He had his mother's courage and tenacity, but it was his father's ruthlessness that truly set him apart. With a chiseled face and sharp features, Wei cut an imposing figure, but make no mistake, he was not a man to be trifled with. There was a seriousness that hung about Wei like a cloak. He was not one to waste time on small talk or idle chatter. His friends, if you could call them that, often said that he appeared as if he were always plotting something in the back of his mind. But this was simply the way he operated. Everything about Wei was long-term and strategic, from how he moved in the shadows to how he played chess. And oh, how he played chess. Wei was a master of the game, always thinking several steps ahead of his opponents. His mind was a labyrinth of tactics and plans, each move calculated to perfection. Many had dared to cross his path, but none had emerged victorious.
Great. So you've invested a lot in Wei, the character. Were there any characters that you especially enjoyed writing about, and were there some that were really hard to bring to life? And you know, a few folks are being naughty with their phones. Could you please put them off?
So Wei actually gets the maximum screen time, even though he's the villain in the book. And he was the most fun to write, definitely, because I had to explore his depth of darkness. And that's not easy, because the man, there's nothing redeeming about him. He's just dark. He only thinks ill, and you know how he can trample over others and get his way. And that was a bit difficult to write, but it was fun. I can't say he's my favorite character, but it was the toughest character to nail.
So what darkness within yourself did you have to tap into?
I think there's a bit of way in all of us. Best kept under control.
You're not talking about the protein, clearly. You know, I'm sorry if I put you on the spot here, but clearly the mother-son relationship is quite central to the book. Obviously, there are two sets of sons. Do you draw upon your own relationship with your own mother because there are elements of the autobiography in every book, isn't there? So how did you, what were those emotions and those elements of that relationship that you drew upon?
So I've realized that when I wrote about Pema, there was a lot of my mother in her. I did not realize it at that time, but when I look back, then I can see there's a lot of my mom's characteristics in Pema. So she's tenacious, Pema. My mother was mad tenacious. Pema is a fighter, and she decides to abandon her entire past for what she believed in. So I explore finding purpose through Pema. And so that I think was, if I can call it autobiographical. It has definitely strong elements of my mother in it.
And what about the son part of it?
You're asking if I identify with Way or Vijay?
With either, yeah. Or with elements of their characters.
Probably Vijay. There's a bit of me in Vijay. He's fond of Tintin as well.
Right.
So there's that.
He's also fond of his wife.
There is that too. Yes.
Right.
Remind me never to call a friend for this.
Get in line. So, you know, it's a long, hard process writing a book. I mean, I said this at the opening, you know, you disappeared pretty much for a long time. Is it a lonely process to write a book? Do you sort of escape or sort of retreat into this imaginarium of your own to the exclusion of all external company and influences, or do you shut yourself out? How does it work? What's the process?
Yeah, pretty much that. I really, to be honest, I didn't know what I'm getting into. I just knew that I wanted to do it. And it just seemed enticing and appealing. And when I started writing, I realized how little I knew about writing. I knew I had a story in my mind. I just didn't understand the process. So I enrolled myself for a couple of courses online. And to be honest, they gave me more anxiety than clarity, because they just made me feel ridiculously inadequate, that I'm not geared to write. But I had this need, I need to do this thing. So I realized that the only way to do it is to just shut yourself from the world and give yourself a target of a number of words per day. And I tried to follow that. It took me, I think, about a year to do this. I did not know I could do this. So it was hugely, it came as a shock to me that I could do it. You know, just lock myself in, not meet people, just step out when I needed to step out. And yeah.
And how did the family deal with that? You dedicated the book to your daughter, Antara, of course. But how did the family deal with this new avatar of yours?
I think they're still coming to terms with it. They've been very supportive. Antara, of course, has had numerous sessions with me. Some of the plot twists have actually come from her. No, why don't you do it this way? And she always brought up her generation's perspective. No, my generation likes it this way. This is not going to work. So I'm very thankful for that.
Right. Is there another piece you'd like us to read? Would you like to read another piece for us?
Sure. Yeah. Let me read about
Sorry.
Pema. Okay. So this is from the chapter 1959. So when I read about Wei, it was describing who Wei is. this piece doesn't describe Pema, but it tells you what she's going through.
Could you tell us a little bit about the character first?
Pema is this young Tibetan guerrilla fighter. She's born into riches, and I don't want to give the story away, but for all kinds of reasons, she has to leave her house, and she disappears into the forest, and she trains with the Khampa guerrillas, which were dedicated to freeing Tibet from the Chinese control at that time. And she is actually called upon to assist with the security arrangements for His Holiness when he was coming to India in March 1950. So this little piece is what happens to her in that journey.
Right.
As Pema took aim with her pistol, her finger hovering over the trigger to deliver the final blow, a sudden ray of moonlight revealed Deng's face, just as he begged, "Don't shoot!" Pema stumbled back in shock and horror. She had not expected this. She had not expected Deng to be here. And now that she had him in her sights, she was unsure what to do next. Burning with rage and anger, Pema's first instinct was to pump a bullet into the man who had brought nothing but sorrow into her life. But in that very second, she also realized that if she killed him, her Norbu would have no one left to look after him. But she could not just let him go either. No, she had to find a way to make him suffer. Without a word, she fired a shot, purposely missing Deng's head only by inches. "This is for my Norbu," she said in a cold, quiet voice. Before Deng could react, she fired again, this time aiming for his kneecap. "And this is for you," she said, her voice filled with rage and vengeance. Deng let out a piercing scream as the bullet tore through his thigh, shattering bone and flesh. In that moment, he recognized who his adversary was and why she had spared his life. He looked up to curse her, but Pema had disappeared into the night.
So it's quite interesting that your chapters have Latin titles. Why is that?
My daughter studies Latin, and I was having a chat with her, and she came up with some names, and it just occurred to me that why not name all of them Latin? I think I had named one of them Malafide, which is the Latin word term I knew, and then it just made sense to name all of them from Latin phrases.
Right. What advice could you give people who seem to think they have a book in them, and there are lots of NDTV folks, and we're part of a WhatsApp group. It's a bit like a family of old fogies who keep sending each other greetings and happy birthdays and whatnot. And and a lot of them are turning to writing. They're not writing about the juicy stuff, but they are writing interesting things like your wonderful book. What's your advice?
Well, there's one thing that I learned. I think it was in one of those classes that I had enrolled for online, that when you start writing, don't edit what you wrote the previous day. Because if you do that, you will never write more. You will just keep on and on editing what you've done. And I took that advice very seriously, because each time I stopped to look at what I'd written the previous day, I just found mistakes and 10,000 ways to improve it. And I think someone had said in one of those courses that you can fix a badly written page, but you can't fix a blank page.
Right.
So
Fantastic.
just keep moving ahead. Don't stop. Later on, you can find someone like Ishita to edit it for you. You can also edit it yourself before you find someone like Ishita. And that is a smart thing to do, you know. But don't stop writing. Just get it out of your system. That is one thing that really helped me.
And for a book like this, for instance, there's a lot of research. It's very research heavy. And it's research about a part of the world where much information is not necessarily available, particularly pop culture. I mean, you know a lot about the CIA, MI6, Mossad, but very little is known about Chinese intelligence, the Second Bureau. how did you come upon all of this information, and even about, Tibet and their traditional fighters, the Kampas, for example? That's a lot of research in there. How did you go about that?
I think it would be fair to say that it was 2 parts research, 1 part writing.
Right.
For a book like this. A lot of research went into it, definitely. I met some people who worked in the intelligence services. They've shared some interesting insights with me, which I can't name them and I can't share that. But that helped, definitely. But today, a lot of it is available online, but you got to search for it. And you got to make sure that it's authentic.
But dark web.
But not necessarily the dark web, even the pretty lit up web. The information is there. But you just got to be sure that it's authentic.
Right.
And to be honest, when I started writing, I didn't know that such a thing as the Second Bureau existed. I didn't know that the Kampas existed. That just came out of the research.
Right, fantastic. Well, I think, it's been wonderful listening to you, Arpit, and I'd really love you to read another passage for us, and then we can perhaps close this session. And thanks for having me here, and thank you everyone for being here this evening. I hope you really, really enjoy the book, enjoy it as much as Arpit did writing it, although he was more nervous writing it, and I hope you won't be. But thanks very much for being here. Wonderful of all of you to come.
So this is Vijay, and this takes place in 2020, and it takes place at 10 p.m. at the Vigyan Bhavan on Maulana Azad Road. By the way, the book has a lot for people living in Delhi. The action sequences in the Vigyan Bhavan, at Delhi Heart, in the Tughlaqabad Fort. So if you are from these parts, which obviously you are, you'll enjoy that.
Permission की problem होएगी.
तेरे को
Show
होगी
बनाने
तो-
में.
Do not resist us, Vijay, Sadat commanded from across the room. You will have your chance in court. You can offer your explanation there. We know that you have been in league with the Chinese. Your own man, Aravindan, called it. Aravindan, Vijay retorted with fury. That is a lie. You know it, Sadat. You know me, damn it. He then turned to the Prime Minister, his desperation palpable. I implore you, sir, grant me just 10 minutes. I can clarify everything. But the Prime Minister's response was bitter and cutting. What will you explain to me? He glowered with disdain. That the hijacking was legitimate? That you never sought the Chinese help? Vijay attempted to interject, his voice strained. Sir, I came here today on my own accord. I requested this audience to inform you of this very conspiracy that I uncovered only hours ago. But the Prime Minister had heard enough. Take him away, he ordered, tersely turning around. Sadat nodded to one of his men and he stepped forward, his fingers curling around a pair of handcuffs as he snarled at Vijay to turn around. But at that moment, something inside Vijay snapped and his ordinary facade began to fade. He knew the importance of the moment and realized that he had only one opportunity to clear his name. His failure to act in this instance would cause the collapse of everything he had tirelessly built, his career, reputation, and very existence. Then, in a surge of sudden swiftness, before anyone could suspect or react, Vijay executed a lethal maneuver and disarmed the commando, taking away his gun and catching the unsuspecting soldier off guard. Then, with that gun, Vijay fired a calculated shot at the commando standing beside Sadat. The bullet hit the man's chest, but Vijay knew about the bulletproof vest he was wearing. Still, the impact sent the commando sprawling on the carpet. With both the commandos down and chaos reigning, Vijay aimed his gun at Sadat. Stop, Sadat. This is a big mistake.
Thank you, Arpit. Wonderful. Very visual. Any questions from the audience? We'd love to hear from you. Go on, Kishale. Is there a microphone?
We have a mic. We have a mic, right? Yeah.
This is to Arpit as well as to Professor Wahid, which I've been thinking of asking. Tibet was the place of the great game. And you know, during colonial India, the British and other powers also would launch pandits and monks to Tibet so Tibet was the spy area. I mean, all the real spies were in Tibet. Sarat Chandra Das and then Kinthup tracked Tibet. Was there any part of that spy phase of Tibet in your book? I mean, did that inform your book in any ways? And also to Professor Wahid, if you could tell us that, why was the great game being played in Tibet?
Okay, I'll just answer briefly. Yeah. No, that I have not touched on that part of Tibetan history at all.
Okay. I mean, the Tibetan, why was the great game being played is basically something that started perhaps as early as the 13th century, but then sort of intensified during the 18th century, mid 17th to late 18th century. And that was when Russia, Peter the Great, in the 17th century, looked and saw this vast continent before him, and said, well, might as well go there because the Europeans were eating at his heels, during that time. And on the other hand, the Chinese, at that time, as the Qing Empire, were also expanding and came to Xinjiang and, in fact, to Tibet as well. So then the great game that you speak of is a late 19th century sort of phenomenon, or mid-19th century phenomenon, when the British sort of looked and saw that the Russians had expanded into Central Asia, which is Samarkand, Bukhara, and that Transoxiana, that area. And so surmised that they were under, they were under the impression that the Russians were coming for India. And in fact, what had happened is that Napoleon had written a letter to Tsar Alexander in the late 17th, early 18th century, 19th century, and said, listen, I'm coming to see you in Moscow, Napoleon, and together we'll go to India to conquer. And that fell into British India hands. And so ever since then, the Russians were always coming. And there was this movie or something, I think, called The Russians Are Coming. Nobody looked at a map, of course, to see how they would bring an army, an entire army. So that's how Tibet figures, actually.
Kishore, out of course question mat pucho. Anybody else, please? Arjun. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. In course. Professor Wahid, actually, first to you. The Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama turns 90 this year. Is there you mentioned that there is this, after his statement in 1988, there was a change in attitudes between the hardliners. Some of them, there was a split in Tibetan society, so to say, what are the things. Now, has it come to a point where the Dalai Lama himself has, in a way, said that his reincarnation will take place outside Tibet? And also, has it turned into a situation where the Dalai Lama has been the symbol of Tibet overall? But is it changing to some extent now that he's no longer there? And is there a, so to say, to use not the best word, but a secular leadership coming up in Tibet, which will lead the next generation?
In Tibet, you say?
In Tibet.
Okay, I don't think there's anything like a secular leadership in Tibet. There are many Tibetans who have crossed the Rubicon, so to speak, and gone there. But you cannot talk about that as some sort of a movement within Tibet that would be secular. And I say this after at least 6 visits to Tibet, just wandering around, trying to be inconspicuous. And the feelings for the Dalai Lama are extremely intense. And in fact, when there was talk going on there was talk about maybe His Holiness going to China to negotiate. At that time, I remember a farmer that I met in central Tibet, and he said, please tell His Holiness not to come, because there will be danger. So I think that is the thing. I don't think that His Holiness engages in that debate between the hardliner, as you call them, and I don't know whether the opposite would be softliner or whatever, a slightly more realistic approach to what could happen. But yes, that divide does exist in thing. It's intensified because we know that the Dalai Lama is not going to be with us forever. But at the moment, within the Tibetan community, not considered too polite to talk about his going away, at this point. So there's a bit of I wouldn't say tension, but awkwardness about it, because people don't want to talk about it. At any rate, His Holiness has said, I'm going to be there around until 113 or something like that. So, I think so those are the things that pertain to, the kind of situation.
Thank you.
Anyone else, please? Questions? Antara, do you want to ask your dad anything?
I'm good, thank you.
Anyone? Right, thank you very much. Thank you, and great having you here, Arpit, talk about your wonderful book. And congratulations once again, and wish you and the book every success. Good luck.
So, thank you, Arun and Arpit. That was a really fun and interesting conversation. Thank you, Professor Wahid. Thank you, Manik and Arpita, for being here and engaging us in conversation. And thank you to the audience for being here and being so engaged. Lastly, on behalf of all of us, thank you to Juhi for helping organize this event so well and so precisely. Please join us for refreshments outside, and I think most of you have already bought a copy of the book. Go buy one more, gift it to people, get it signed by Arpit. And thank you again for coming this evening.
Get it signed some other day. मैं टेक केयर ऑफ है मेरी टीम की जाती है
You should sit somewhere up. This lecture, सब लोग बैठ कर
I need to go jump into it. I heard the bits and I was like, कभी नहीं ट्रेटर Arpit, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. जब मिलेंगे तब करा लेंगे
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.